All right, guys, in today's Trading Academy series, we're going to be talking about trend lines, and this is also known as LRLR, or low resistance liquidity. Now, first, let's talk about what trend lines are. So trend lines are just like how they sound. They show a trend in price. It's a line that shows if we're going up or down. Okay, it could be a reference. If we look at some of these images here, this is a really clean image. You see this line that's holding up price. You see how price, the lows are respecting this line along the way. We're trending up. Clearly, right? And then it goes the same for the downside, right? If we're trending down, you should see resistance or your highs respecting that trend line. So if your highs are respecting a trend line, you're typically trending down, assuming that it's lower highs. And if your lows are respecting a trend line and it's higher lows, I would assume that we're going up. So you can use them to see how we're trending. Now, one thing about trend lines, and this is a good image here, is that you don't want to get overwhelmed with them. When you first get into identifying trend lines, it does take a little bit of practice. You do need to put in chart time because it takes time to see this with your eye. It takes a little bit of finesse. Otherwise, your chart's going to be looking something crazy like this. So now you have an idea of what trend lines are, right? They show a trend. Let's dive into the charts and find some examples here. So right off the bat, we have this example in front of us here. Again, I'm going to refer to this a lot as low resistance liquidity throughout, or LRLR, but this is also known as a trend line. So right here, we have this trend line identified at these highs. Here's one thing I want you to note in this example here. Do you see how close these highs are to one another? You see how close they are? See how they're bunched up a little bit kind of tight in this range here? That's ideally what you want to see. Now, they can be spaced apart. Let's say we only have this high, and this high, and then that forms a trend line. That's okay. The main thing is you want it to look clean, right? This is where it takes finesse. They could be bunched up like this. They could be separated, whatever it is. But at the end of the day, you want to make sure that they are very clean trend lines. Let's go throughout the chart and let's find some more examples here. And I want to show you an example of some what not to do's and some bad examples. So here's one here. Look at this trend line here. Yes, we have the highs spaced out here. This trend line, I would say, is about a B setup. It's a B grade. It's decent, but it's not the most obvious. You should be able to step away from your chart and really see this trend line pop out to you. It should be very clear what direction price is moving in. And let's look for one more example here. Trend line right here, pretty clean. I like this. This is more of a B to A grade setup. The only thing I don't like about this is that this high isn't really a standalone high. So one thing you want to note with trend lines, and a little tip, is that you want your highs or lows to be pretty standalone or obviously looking. Now, how can you use trend lines with your trading? We never got to that point. The point with trend lines is that all it is just another support and resistance level. And if you haven't seen my support and resistance level video in the academy, go ahead and check it out. But all it is I like to tell people it's dynamic support and resistance levels. So you have your typical support and resistance levels here, right? And then price is bouncing in between them. We talked about price can do one of two things. We can break support and then it becomes new resistance, or we can break resistance and then it becomes new support. This theory is the same with trend lines. It's no different. The only difference with trend lines and these two lines is that these two lines here are lateral. Well, let's introduce some trend lines here then. So let's say I have a trend line like this and we're downtrending. If price is respecting this along the way, same thing goes with this. This is serving as resistance right now. If we break out of the trend line, I expect that resistance to become new support, and then we continue higher. Is this all starting to make sense? So trend lines are basically going to be dynamic support and resistance. Now, it does go a layer deeper into that, and this is where I want to get into low resistance liquidity. Trend lines, they can be used as support and resistance levels, but they can also be used as draw on liquidity levels, or DOLs. Now, I do have a liquidity video as well that's in the academy. Go check that out before watching this if you want more insight on what liquidity is. But liquidity is ultimately what drives price, and I want to show you the beauty of these trend lines here. So look at this example right here. Let's go back to this one. So we have this trend line here. I'm going to mark this as low resistance liquidity. Again, this is an area in which I expect low resistance for price to run through, hence low resistance liquidity. If we look across the chart here, look at what price ended up doing at some point in time. We ended up just blasting through all these highs right here. And that's kind of the thought with low resistance liquidity or trend line liquidity. Let's find some more examples here. Going back to this example here, you can see price at some point eventually ran through all this liquidity. See how we shot through here? Right here is some more low resistance liquidity. And again, you can see how price eventually blasted through all of that. This is the power in finding trend lines. Not only do trend lines help you identify where support and resistance are at a dynamic level, but you can find areas in which price is going to go run through later. Low resistance liquidity and trend lines is something you need to practice marking on your charts. It takes time, it takes finesse. They are very real in nature. Don't let anybody on social media tell you trend lines don't exist, they don't work. Let me give you an example again. Here's a bad example, right? As you're going through your charting. We don't want to see this. Why is this a bad example? It's just not, it's not obvious, right? You have a low here, you have a low here, you have, I guess, some lows here. I get that part, but you see how this trend line's kind of cattywampus? It's not really creating a trend here. I'm kind of forcing this trend line into here. So let's go find some other examples. This example here is not too shabby. I like this one. The main reason is again, you have these standalone highs, very obvious highs. And price is somewhat in a trending direction. I'd give that about a B+ setup. Here's a nice example here, right? So these are all baby trend lines, but ultimately trend lines, they exist everywhere in nature. It's a trend indicator. And I'll give you an example on the higher time frame with the stock market, right? You can see ultimately we've been floating on a trend line for years, right? Look at this. See that? We're respecting this trend line. Low, low, lows, low, respecting the trend line. So trend lines are very powerful if you identify them correctly. And again, it's kind of an art. You can see in this example here, once more, this isn't exact touches to the trend line here. You're kind of sticking out of it a little bit there. This is an exact touch, I'd argue. This isn't quite touching it. So it takes a little bit of art. It takes a little bit of finesse. Put in the chart time. That's going to be your homework. Go to the charts. Look for these trend lines here. And also don't only look for the trend lines, see how price respects them. A lot of people like to use trend lines for breakout trades. So let's say I have a trend line like this. And again, old support, old resistance can become new support. So let's say I'm trending like this. And then I see price testing that trend line, and then we start breaking out. A lot of times you're going to see big moves coming out of trend lines, and that's because, again, it's no different than support and resistance. It's just support and resistance is dynamic, right? Instead of being just lateral like this. And then we break out. Sometimes you get the retest back to that trend line. That's where you can find another entry. And then we have continuation right there. Okay, so trend lines are very powerful. You want to use them in your trading. And then over time, as you start to identify trend lines more, start to incorporate them in terms of areas where price could head towards, right? Use them as draws on liquidity. This is why the name low resistance liquidity is there. That's why I'm using that term more. It comes from ICT, and it's just hence the name, right? It's low resistance liquidity. It's low resistance for price to go run through. That gets a little bit more advanced, but keep continuing through the academy here. And a lot of the concepts are all going to come together and make a lot of sense. So that about does it for the trendline liquidity video. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and I will catch you in the next academy video.
Okay.